our next session is called Towards the Harmonious Collective Existence, and I would like to call our next two speakers for this, Mr. George Vrekhem, the integration of the four Varnas, and Beloo Mehra from SACAR on envisioning the future society. Will you please briefly introduce yourself, and you have 12 minutes each.
Namaste. My name is George van Vrekhem. I have written some books on Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I have been 8 years in the ashram and 32 years in Auroville. I have been 40 years in India. The integration of the four Varnas. Originally I was given 15 minutes. Now I hear that this has been reduced to 12. I'll do the best I can. It is noticeable, wrote Sri Aurobindo, that both in Europe and Asia there was a common tendency which we cannot trace to any close interchange of ideas and must therefore attribute to the operation of the same natural cause and necessity, towards the evolution of a social hierarchy based on a division according to four different social activities: spiritual function, political domination, and the double economic function of mercantile production and interchange and dependent labor and service. The spirit, form, and equipoise worked out were very different in different parts of the world according to the bent of the community and its circumstances, but the initial principle was almost identical. Thus writes Sri Aurobindo. The social hierarchy, of course, is the Vedic institution of the fourfold order, Chaturvarna, the four Varnas, often, says Sri Aurobindo, miscalled the system of the four castes. The four Varnas are, as you know, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. In Europe, they were respectively called clerics, knights, merchants, and servants. Where or what was the origin of the common hierarchy? According to Sri Aurobindo, it must be attributed to the operation of the same natural cause and necessity. He mentions the Purusha Sukta of the Vedas, where the four orders are described as having sprung from the body of the creative deity, from his head, arms, thighs, and feet. To us, Sri Aurobindo says, this is merely a poetical image, and its sense is that the Brahmins were the man of knowledge, the Kshatriyas the men of power, the Vaishyas the producers and support of society, the Shudras its servants. As if these were all, writes Sri Aurobindo, as if the men of these days would have so profound a reverence for mere poetical figures like these of the body of Brahma, and would have built upon them elaborate systems of ritual and sacred memory, enduring institutions, great demarcations of social type and ethical discipline. We read always our mentality in that of these ancient forefathers. And it is therefore that we can find in them nothing but imaginative barbarians. Even the metaphor or simile in the Vedic style is used with a serious purpose and expected to convey a reality not to suggest a pleasing artifice of thought, writes Sri Aurobindo. And he continues, to them, to the Vedic seers, the symbol of the Creator's body was more than an image. It expressed a divine reality. Human society was for them an attempt to express in life the cosmic Purusha, who has expressed himself otherwise in the material and the supraphysical universe. Man and the cosmos are both of them symbols and expressions of the same hidden reality. Considering this, there seems to be what one could call an archetype of the human being, containing in itself simultaneously the macro and the microcosmos. The intuition or revelation of this divine archetype can be found in some forms of higher spirituality, for instance, Gnosticism. We find another confirmation of the divine archetype in one of the mother's private conversations from 1961. In this conversation, she tells about an experience during one of her visits to Max and Madame Théon in Tlemcen, in Algeria, a century ago. She says, "With great occult dexterity, I left behind one after the other of the 12 bodies of the human incarnation and arrived at the edge of the formless. In this domain, one experienced total unity. Unity in something that was the essence of love. In a quite unexpected and astounding way, I found myself in the presence of what one might call the principle of the human form. It did not resemble the human being in the sense that it had nothing of what we are used to see physically, but it was a form that stood upright, just on the border between the world of forms and the formless." And the mother says that it was like a kind of blueprint, model, or archetype. Then she says, "When I met Sri Aurobindo and talked to him about it, he told me, it is surely the prototype of the supramental form. I saw," says the mother, "I saw it several times afterwards, later on, and this proved to be true." This is so important that there is a kind of prototype or archetype behind the whole evolution of life on Earth. This is what life evolves toward, what it has taken shape in us, and what would later then be the model or type of the supramental being. We are, in Sri Aurobindo's words, on the way of becoming the true individual in whose universality we can be united with all others. Unity the race moves toward and must one day realize, he writes in The Ideal of Human Unity. In the course of the degradation as described in the human cycle, the hierarchy of the Vedic Varnas has gradually calcified and become the external fixed hierarchy of the caste system. Sri Aurobindo writes, "The rigid hierarchy of castes, with the pretension and arrogance of the caste spirit, was a later development. In the simpler life of old, difference or even superiority of function did not carry with it a sense of personal or class superiority. At the beginning, the most sacred religious and social function, that of the rishi and sacrificer, seems to have been open to man of all classes and occupations." And he writes in the human cycle, "Each man contains in himself the whole divine potentiality, and therefore the Shudra cannot be rigidly confined within his Shudrahood, nor the Brahmin in his Brahminhood. but each contains within himself the potentialities and the need of perfection of his other elements of divine manhood. How many minutes? Few of the Europeans who look disdainfully down on the Indian caste system realize how rigid the hierarchy of the castes or estates has been in their own society. In feudal times, the Brahmins of the clergy and the Kshatriyas of the hereditary nobility dominated the Vaishyas of the merchant caste, and the Shudras or serfs were not much more than the part of the property of the two dominant castes. The social order was supposedly willed by God and rooted in the religion. The estate of the merchants, the third estate, came into its own around the time that the towns acquired certain rights and the cathedrals were built. With the Enlightenment, its philosophers and the Age of Reason grew the awareness firstly of the third estate as a coherent and articulate body, secondly of the disequilibrium in society of life's values and possibilities which had become insufferable. What up to then had been seen as a social order decreed and dominated from above, philosophers like Locke and Rousseau made the new intelligentsia see as constituted from below. All humans were born equal and free and had the right to strive for happiness. And so it happened that the French Revolution, totally unforeseen, became the revolution of the Third Estate, which at once annulled the power of its previous tyrants and proclaimed itself the representatives of the people, of the body of citizens of the sacred nations. The omnipresent motto of its revolution became equality, liberty, fraternity, which it formulated solemnly in the Declaration of the Rights of the Human Being and the Citizen. This threefold principle became the basis of democracy as we know it. Sri Aurobindo considered the acquisitions of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution essential for the progress of humanity. They were and are a necessary step in the evolutionary process. In the ideal of human unity, he wrote, the principal gifts of the French Revolution must remain and be universalized as permanent acquisitions, indispensable elements in the future order of the world. One can find the same assertion on many pages of his writings. For instance, freedom, equality, brotherhood are three Godheads of the soul. And these three things are in fact the nature of the soul, for freedom, equality, and unity are the eternal attributes of the spirit. But the revolutionary ideals, Godheads of the soul, and the coming age of the Third Estate left behind a part of humanity. Its biggest part, the mass of the Fourth Estate, the proletariat, the Shudras. If the French Revolution brought the Third Estate to the fore, it was also the occasion on which the lowest, the dregs of humanity assembled and claimed the freedom of their equal rights in universal fraternity. The crowds, the masses got organized by persons who formulated their feelings and spoke for them. By a curious convergence of circumstances, the Industrial Revolution, which with its unprecedented concentrations of proletarians, took off, and what had been demanded in Paris and consequently in the whole of France became a universal claim for the rights of the poorest and the downtrodden. Socialism and communism followed. This is what true subjectivism teaches us, writes Sri Aurobindo. First, that we are a higher self than our ego and our members. Secondly, that we are in our life and our being not only ourselves, but all others. For there is a secret solidarity which our egoism may kick at and strive against, but from which we cannot escape. It is the old Indian discovery that our real I is a supreme being, which is our true self, and which it is our business to discover and consciously become. And secondly, that the divine is one in all, expressed in the individual and in the collectivity. However, the path to consciousness and conscious unity is steep and arduous for the still half-animal race. The human has to take up into him the animal and even the mineral and vegetable, writes Sri Aurobindo. They constitute his physical nature. They dominate his vitality. They have their hold upon his mentality. Because of his downward propensity or downward gravitation, each integration of a lower state into a higher one results in an elevation of the lower one, but also in a pulling down of the values of the higher one and of the whole to whom the higher belongs. The third estate became the commercial, Philistine bourgeoisie of the 19th century. The integration of the fourth estate has created the global mass culture in which we live, the environment of the sensational man with its own trinity of excitement, fun, and sex. All the same, let there be no misunderstanding. All this was and is inevitable and necessary for the human being to realize its possibilities and be the bridge builder of the higher species to come. Moreover, all possibilities, all qualities of the four Varnas are now at everyone's disposition and must be acquired and worked out by the pioneers, anonymous in the mass, but the seeds of the future. This is an integral vision requiring an integral practice in order to become an integral being. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm supposed to introduce myself. Many of you have seen me already, or I've spoken with you. My name is Beloo, Mehra, and I work here at SACAR. I facilitate courses in Indian culture, integral education, and Sri Aurobindo social thought. And along with Larry and other colleagues, I also work on the quarterly journal that we have, New Rays. And probably many of you know me through my email when I send out the bi-monthly newsletter, Masa, that I also work on. So with that introduction being sufficient, I would like to move on to my topic. I don't know what I was thinking when I chose this very big topic, envisioning the future society. with our limited mental capacities that we have, can we really talk about, or can we really, take up any such topic in the given 10, 12, 15 minutes or so? So, especially when whatever I have to share with you is basically just something that we have all come across in reading Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy. So I thought one way to approach this topic would be, instead of just sharing with you a few things from what Sri Aurobindo has already said about the future of society, instead of doing that, since we don't have, at least I don't have the vision to see that future, I only have faith that that future exists for us, and a conviction, because Sri Aurobindo himself and the mother have convinced us that that future exists for the future, for society and for humanity. I thought I might approach it a little bit differently, and I would take this opportunity as a way to explore the possibility whether this vision of spiritualized society, or the vision that Sri Aurobindo and mother have given us, makes sense to our rational minds based on what I can see today, based on what many of us see around us today. So if that makes sense, then maybe the ideal of spiritualized society also makes sense to us. One of the things Sri Aurobindo says, that the coming of spiritual age is almost certainly preceded by the appearance of a large number of individuals who are dissatisfied with the present condition of affairs, present state of affairs, which includes the present vital intellectual existence that most of us rational beings are supposed to be leading. But, as many of us know in ourselves, that many times we are actually, our actions and choices are being determined by our infra-rational tendencies rather than rational tendencies. However, for the purpose of this little talk, if we say that if we see around us more and more people being dissatisfied or discontented with the present state of individualistic, rationalistic worldview and reality, there may be a hope that yes, there would be something better following this discontent, this kind of crisis that we face. And also this kind of discontent, crisis that we see around us sometimes gets reflected in very simple things like highly paid corporate executive giving up his very promising career and, I don't know, starting a school in some slum area of the city. It's a way to find a possibility to do something that has a greater meaning, greater value for that individual. Sometimes a university dean might give up her very bright career and the seclusion, air-conditioned hall of Ivory Tower, and do something, maybe start an organization to work with children of sex workers, something totally opposite from what they have been trained to do. But that dissatisfaction leads them to do these kinds of things. And we see more and more examples of all that around us. Just now I was talking to, at the tea break, I was talking to Paolo there at the back, who's a Reiki master. We see an increasing acceptance of these kinds of healing, alternative healing modalities. More and more people are flocking to that. People are finding that the conventional medicine no longer works. More and more people are going, giving up the conventional religion as we understand and going towards new age spiritual movements, for lack of a better term. I'll just go with that term. And these phenomena are not only occurring in societies like India, where we say we are from ancient times a spiritual civilization or a spiritual culture, but even in societies which have given more importance, or where the trajectory of thought, I should say, has been more along the lines of materialistic views of reality. There also we see this more and more. Before joining SACAR, I was living in the United States. I lived there for about 15 years or so. And I saw many developments around me, which I would like to just share, just so that we see these signs that Sri Aurobindo has often talked about. He used a phrase called groping beginnings. These may be the groping beginnings that could indicate to us that something better. We are moving towards something better than what we are. Yes, he has also cautioned us over and over again that these groping beginnings would only make any difference if they move on, if they take us to the next step, which is, I'll come to that in a little while. But let's first look at what those groping beginnings are. Since my time there, and I take that as an example just because if those developments are happening in a society which we understand as through and through a materialistic society, we in India should have a better chance, but that's a whole different discussion, whether we actually have a better chance or not. And there is a whole history behind that. We may not be, and West in some cases may have a better advantage on us. But since my time there was spent mostly in the academic world, in the intellectual arena, I will just share a few examples of trends that are coming up in the intellectual discourse, which actually sort of also addresses some of the things that Professor Srivatsan was mentioning in the morning. Why can't we do this? He was posing more as a questions, and I would like to respond that many of these things are beginning. They may be happening on the margins, but still the very fact that those attempts are being taken place, I would rather see those things, the attempts that are happening, instead of just saying that we really aren't going anywhere. One of the things, of course, is the very rigid boundaries that have existed so far between different disciplines in the intellectual arena. We see a tendency of melting away of those boundaries more and more. Even fields as far apart as biology and computer science, information technology, they have been coming closer every day. New developments in fields that are, fields like neuroimmunophysiology. I can't even pronounce the names. That kind of shows there is a tendency of these intellectual disciplines coming closer. For about 10 years or so, and even here at SACAR, I teach courses in qualitative research. And when I first discovered this way of doing research, I've been trained as an economist with statistics and econometrics. And when I first discovered this field, I was just, wow, there is something called as value-based research. There is something called as subjective methods of doing academic research. Wonderful. All these new epistemologies that have been breaking this dichotomy that has existed for so long between very rational, scientific way of knowing and very subjective, experiential, even contemplative ways of knowing. So from qualitative research, I moved on to feminist research, which is a lot more subjective, experiential, which gives primacy to many of these ways of constructing intellectual knowledge. That's a couple of quick examples. Then there is a very growing field of transformative education, transformative leadership, transformative learning. There is a journal of transformative education, and just you skip through the pages of any of the volumes, the number of articles that talk about these new approaches to education that are actually being implemented in classrooms. It's just a very positive sign that these attempts, even though on the margins and maybe in small pockets, these things are happening. And many of these approaches to transformative education, etc., are based on a very foundation of what they understand as an emancipatory or liberatory approach to education. Now, this is interesting. One of the things Sri Aurobindo says is that the first thing a spiritualized society may be able to do is or it may start with the idea that the three truths of existence, freedom, unity, and God, it will enable people to realize these three truths of existence, freedom, unity of God. And right here in these approaches to education that are actually being implemented in pockets still, which are based on the idea of freedom, even though this freedom for them begins with challenging the present social structure. Maybe is it on the basis of race, class, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, what have you. The very fact that there is a course content, there is a pedagogical approach that takes these into consideration and that makes people think about these inequalities and forces them and challenges them to break these dichotomies, starting from their mind. I would rather take it as a positive sign. Then Yeah, I mentioned about the Journal of Transformative Education. There are two very fast-growing institutes, Fetzer Institute and Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. They have been conducting massive research projects on tracking how spirituality itself has entered classrooms. There are actually a number of courses being developed, especially at the higher education level, which have incorporated a spirituality-based worldview and even a spirituality-informed way of teaching, spirituality-informed pedagogy in the classrooms. And these institutes have been sponsoring conferences and coming out with publications that track this trend. I'll just read out few themes that many of these attempts that I've been talking about, which incorporate spirituality in education. The themes that these attempts revolve around are development of self-awareness, a sense of interconnectedness, and a relationship to higher consciousness. All things that Professor Srivatsan mentioned in the morning. All of this is not just a rhetoric anymore. It is, I keep saying, even though on the margins, it is happening. And we need to find out and look out for those attempts and connect with those attempts. Let me see. I am also going to be mindful of the time. Just a couple of other quick examples, and then I'll stop. Recently, all this is happening in the ivory tower, in higher education, in intellectual discourse. But as I mentioned just a while ago, a few other examples that we see more in the mainstream community, increasing importance of holistic healing methods and new age spirituality and all that. Just a couple of very specific examples where these intellectual attempts are also transgressing their own boundaries and reaching out to a larger number of audience. Because we have to remember that one of the things Sri Aurobindo tells us is that many of these signs that he says could be a sign of a precursor of a true subjective age, maybe nothing more than an inner preparation. And the inner preparation is essential because one of the chief stumbling blocks, as he puts it, is the common mind of humanity. And it's that common mind of humanity which has to be prepared to take that next big leap. So my proposition is that if these intellectual attempts, or if these groping beginnings, to use Sri Aurobindo's phrase, can be a bridge builder and can connect with the larger community, mainstream community, we may have another positive beginning. So just in that context, I would like to share a couple of attempts recently that I've become familiar with. A group called, what do they call themselves? Feminine Power. They recently did, actually it's continuing, recently launched a tele-seminar series. So there is the use of technology to create a global community of people. And this tele-seminar series allowed people, especially women, to participate in weekly dialogues, either through telephone or online. And all these talks are also available for free for downloading from their website. They created this seminar and they titled it, it's beautiful, it's called Women on the Edge of Evolution, Awakening to the Power to Co-Create Our Lives and Shape Our Collective Future. The idea that evolutionary spirituality, or the idea of evolution of consciousness itself, has moved out of the academic realm and into a more mainstream community. And more than 5,000 women across the world signed up for this. And I've listened to many of the talks myself, and it's really interesting to hear some of the more current integral thinkers and other women leaders, pioneers in their own fields of work, and what are their thoughts on how we as a collective, starting with certainly with an individual, but eventually as a collective, need to move to the next level. Then another seminar which is just about to start from April 20th, and the particular group which is doing it, they call themselves as Academy for Evolutionaries. So there again, the idea of evolution is right there for mainstream community or anyone who would like to join in and participate in the discussions. And their seminar is going to be called Integral Enlightenment, Awakening to an Evolutionary Relationship to Life. And it's interesting, the objective that they state of this particular seminar is to help people discover what it means to evolve beyond ego and live an awakened evolutionary life. So again, that's one other hopeful, positive example that people are awakening to this kind of idea that there is something beyond the normal, vital intellectual existence in which we persist today. And this very sign itself may be a hope for us that we may be ready to move to the next level, whether that is still a mental subjectivism leading on to a true subjectivism and then to a spiritualized age is a question. But I don't think it's a question of seeing whether the glass is half empty or half full. I would rather see that it is half empty and half full. So I would just like to end, because my 15 minutes are up, with this question that whether these groping beginnings could eventually lead us to some kind of a true subjective age, which may then open the way to a spiritual age, because that's still a faraway dream, but these are some of the things that we can see today. So, like I said, see the glass as half empty and half full. So, thank you.